Welcome to Write Now with Scrivener, where writers talk about how they work, how they develop their ideas, and how they use Scrivener, the app built for long-form writing projects. I'm your host, Kirk McElhearn, author of Take Control of Scrivener. This week, I'm very happy to welcome Sheila O'Flanagan. Sheila has just published, I believe, her 30th book. Sheila, thanks for joining me.
My pleasure.
How does it feel to have 30 books?
It doesn't feel like I've written 30 books, to be perfectly honest. I mean, I know I have done it. I know it has happened, but I still feel like maybe I've written one or two, and you know, it doesn't compute to me that I've written that many books.
You have a whole bookshelf of your books and their translations and all, right? So that takes up a lot of space.
I do. It does take up a lot of space, and every so often I do look at them and I say to myself, "Oh my God, I wrote those." But at the same time, I think inside I still feel like, you know, I think writing is something that you're always learning how to do. And so I don't sit back and look at 30 books and say I know it all or anything like that. I don't feel that way about it.
When you published your first novel, did you have any idea that it would become a career for so long?
No. I did hope, because I had always wanted to write, and I always wanted to have a novel published. So I did hope that I would be able to write more than one. In my head, I thought maybe if I was really lucky or at a push, I might get to 3 or 4 books. And I thought that would be a great achievement. But I think for me, it was like having written one, it was like the dam burst, and suddenly I couldn't stop myself. And so all the things that I wanted to write, all the ideas that I had, and, you know, all the themes that I wanted to explore, they just came flooding out, and I just kept going.
At the time, you were working as a banker. That's a bit different from writing. You were, with foreign exchange, something like that? You weren't just a banker giving people money in a branch.
No, I was a foreign exchange trader and then a government bond trader. So, I used to buy and sell things, which is, I have to say, a very, very different kind of part of your brain to be using, and not one that I ever expected to use. When I was first looking for a job, I just kind of fired off my CV to loads of different places, and for some extraordinary reason, I ended up getting the banking job. And I had been pretty sure I would get a job in a library or something like that, but the banking job came up, and my mother said to me, "Get out there and take that job. That's a great job."
Had you studied business?
No, not at all. It's just really, really bizarre. But of course, this was in the 1980s in Ireland, and there weren't that many jobs. And so the idea of getting a job in a bank is probably, now you look at banks and you think, "Oh my God, what an awful place to have a job for something," because they don't have the element of prestige that they had back then. But back then it was a kind of a prestigious job to have, and we weren't a well-off family, and the idea of me getting a job in a bank was very exciting for my mum. So I took the job. But as I have often said to people, it's something that I did and I enjoyed doing while I was doing it, but it wasn't ever my heart's desire to say I am a banker.
Is that why you just started daydreaming and imagining writing a novel?
I think I was always doing that. I was really lucky that I was brought up in a home where books were considered to be important. And both my parents and my grandmother used to read to me a lot. And so I was always making up stories. And I recall when I was very young, saying to my mother when she'd finished a book, I was saying to her, "Well, what happens next? You know, what are they going to do now?" And she said to me, "Well, you tell me." And so I came up with a whole kind of new plot for the characters in the book she'd read to me. And so I think I just always wanted to write stories.
So you're our first Irish writer, which is particularly close to my heart, in part because of my ancestry, but at least 3 of my favorite writers are Irish. And it's interesting, such a small country, to have so many great writers. Obviously, you can probably guess who one of them is, because everyone pretends to like James Joyce, but I've actually read Finnegan's Wake. Samuel Beckett and William Trevor, to me, is one of the finest authors of short stories in the English language. How is it like living in a country with so many great writers compared to the population?
I think storytelling is in our DNA. It was interesting that you say that about William Trevor, because I agree with you about short stories, and I am a big fan of the short story myself. But I think, generally speaking, Irish people are very we are very conversational, and we're very curious, and we're very empathic, and we enjoy listening to each other's stories. And it's not a big stretch to then start writing them down, and if you look back in our history, if you look way back at the time when we were first, I suppose, conquered by the British and schools were driven underground and everything, we had the hedge schools, as they were called, where people were taught, just quietly and without paper and pencil, and were taught by storytelling. And I think maybe that's just imprinted now in our DNA. And, if you go, there's this kind of, this myth of the Irish pub where it's all conversation and chat and everything, but it is probably 80% true that people tell a lot of stories to each other. So it's not, in all honesty, being a writer in Ireland is not an unusual thing.
Are there that many writers in Ireland? Is it really common?
There really are. I mean, obviously we have some very well-known writers, but at the same time we have a very a great deal of writers who, you'd call mid-list writers, who write a lot. I mean, who wouldn't be particularly well known, but who publish a book every couple of years or so, and who do well. And there are lots of writers.
Are the Irish big readers? I know that the country that reads the most is Iceland, and that kind of makes sense because of the long winters.
Yeah, but we are big readers. And we are big into using our libraries, and book sales in Ireland are always strong relative to the level of the population. So, I mean, everybody is reading a book. People do read a lot. So it is just part of the culture, I guess.
Interestingly, the three writers I mentioned all left Ireland, Joyce, Beckett, and William Trevor. We were talking before the show, you were talking about so many people who left in the 80s. You've sort of half left because you have a house in Spain, but you've got one foot on each side there?
Yeah, well, but I mean, I was fortunate that I didn't have to leave for economic reasons. So, my moving over to Spain for half the year is really a cultural thing. I like the culture and I like the lifestyle, and so that's the reason. It's kind of a slightly different reason. And also, I didn't have to move. I mean, some of the writers that you mentioned, they moved because Ireland back then was a much more repressive kind of society than it is now. So my reasons for moving were far more personal and joyful than perhaps theirs.
You're the first romance author I've had, and I kind of regret that it's taken 2 years of this podcast to get a romance author. When I look for you on Google, I find you in a list of chick lit authors. Is this considered a derogatory term among romance readers and authors?
It kind of is now, and because, a lot of times if somebody says, "Oh, do you mind your books being described as chick lit?" you would say, well, if you have to ask me if I mind, you're immediately coming from a place where there is a certain level of lack of respect towards the genre. And I think, with all due respect, probably men in particular would have a feeling, if you say romance, they have this vision of, it's some girl falling for a guy and, it hasn't gone well, but they all end up happily ever after. And that really is not, I suppose, there's a kind of a genre of novels where that is entirely just what happens. But, in my books and in many of the books that also got thrown into that chick lit category, the storylines and the stories are stronger than that, and they are more about relationships and wider relationships than simply one romantic relationship. So they're about families and the things that happen in families. And for me, that is fundamentally the most important things in our lives, the relationships we have with other people. So I think, exploring that is a really important thing to do, but an enjoyable thing to do.
When we talk about fiction, we put things in genres because I worked in a bookstore for several years. You have to have genres to know where books are going to be shelved. I was watching a TV series last week called Yellowstone, which is set in the American West. It's a modern story. And I was thinking the Western is one of the only genres that's anchored in a space and time, right? Romance novels, you know what the ending's going to be because there has to be, well, in most of them, there has to be a happy ending. And what's important is the journey to get there, right? The process. And you're talking about family, but it's also the relationships. It's the growth of the characters. It's not two-dimensional. I mean, in a lot of rom-com movies it is, but in novels you have so much more space. It's a lot more about the characters, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And I know you're saying a happy ending, and for a lot of people, you know, that's saying, well, these two people maybe get together, but actually ultimately the happy ending may be that they don't. Interestingly, in Sweden, these novels are called feel-good fiction. And the rationale is that, you know, all the things that happen and all the things that get explored within the novel still come to a satisfying ending. And at that point, you are feeling good about what has happened to the characters. So they want to be in a better space. And I think, you know, what you want to do is leave the characters in a better place than they were when you started.
So your latest novel is What Eden Did Next. I find the name of the character Eden quite interesting. So she's a nurse and she was married to a fireman who died. And she's in this stage about 5 years after that she's embarking on a new relationship. Tell us a bit about this book.
You know, I wanted to write, part of this book was written during lockdown, during our second lockdown. And so my mum at the time had a carer coming in to visit her, and I wanted Eden to reflect some of that, the caring things that I was seeing. So Eden in herself is a really caring character, and she's a really good person, I think. A lot of my characters are not always really good people, but I think she is a really good person. But she has gone through a lot. I think even before the book, she has gone through a lot. And so she is in a place where she is ready to move on. She has kind of devoted herself to caring for her clients, and she's also caring for her daughter, but she hasn't spent a lot of time caring for herself. And so when we're meeting her in the book, she's just beginning to feel that she's ready to move on. But she is anchored in her past by her close relationship with her late husband's family. And they are not able to let her move on because they feel that her moving on actually means they lose him. And she's trying to deal with the fact that he was the love of her life. She was devastated when he died. And she's dealing with both her feelings of being, is it okay to move on? And their feelings of, you know, but if you do this, we are going to lose a link with somebody that we love very deeply. And so it's these expectations that people put upon ourselves and the expectations that we place upon ourselves that I wanted to look at in that novel, and how it is that you do manage to move on from grief. And I think, again, that was possibly influenced somewhat by the fact that I was writing this during lockdown and a lot of people were going through very difficult times.
It's interesting you mention that because at the beginning of the book, there's a drawing of this neighborhood called Sycamore Grove, and all the people are on a WhatsApp group talking about each other. And it kind of sounds like lockdown in the sense that they're communicating electronically about what everyone's doing, and everyone's looking out the curtains without looking out the curtains, and everyone knows what everyone's doing in this area.
Yeah, it's kind of, it was actually based on a WhatsApp group that I heard about, that a friend of mine told me about, and it was their local neighborhood watch kind of became a WhatsApp group. And so, you know, if strangers came into their community, they would say, oh, does anybody know who's coming in here, you know? And I just thought, oh my God, that is so constraining and everything, but I love the idea of it for a novel. So yeah, everybody knows what everybody's doing.
It's a bit of a panopticon when everyone's observed and they know they're observed, and they go on the group and they know people are talking about them and all that. It is kind of strange. I'm going to say this softly so no one hears me. I'm in a little village, and there's not a WhatsApp group, but another app where they talk about the neighboring village and this one. And after about 2 or 3 posts, it's anti-vaxxers and conspiracy theorists. And it's just as bad as Facebook. Yeah,
I think when there's a group like that, it always ends up going down some kind of mad rabbit hole, which I try to avoid happening with my WhatsApp group, my fictional WhatsApp group. But it was a fun part to the novel. It was always an enjoyable bit to write those messages.
Okay, we're going to take a break. When we come back, we're going to talk about how you use Scrivener. Writing a book, screenplay, or even a long article is a juggling act. You need to find the right words and the right structure, keep track of research, and refer to notes. Tailor-made for long writing projects, Scrivener is the go-to app for writers of all types. Scrivener combines a typewriter, binder, and corkboard in a single app. A project outline makes it easy to get an overview of your work and flip between sections. Refer to research alongside your writing, and just drag and drop to rearrange your work. Write in any order in sections as large or small as you like, and let Scrivener stitch it all together when you're ready to share your words with the world. With Scrivener, you'll find everything you need to start writing and keep writing. Scrivener is available for Mac, Windows, iPad, and iPhone. Download the free trial from scrivenerapp.com. Right now, with Scrivener listeners can get a 20% discount with the coupon code PODCAST. That's scrivenerapp.com. So, Sycamore Grove, is it a nice place to live? It almost sounds like you're, I don't want to, it's not like a Stepford Wife thing, but there's a bit of a dark side going on there.
I'd struggle to live in a community like that, I have to say. But that's this thing, this thing there is now for gated communities. And I mean, Sycamore Grove is not like that. You don't have to have, there isn't a gated community thing. But, there's a lot of that now. And I just think, oh my God, it's my worst nightmare. The idea of, everybody being the same or something in this community. So, I wouldn't fancy it myself.
You talked about romance novels not necessarily having happy endings, but feel good. I like that idea of feel good. And that's what you get when you watch a rom-com. Movies are often different because they end with the first kiss, right? At least the classic rom-com. But romance novels today, and I say this as someone who does not read a lot of romance novels, but in the past year, I've been trying to read more. And the genre has it's spread out in all different directions, not even talking about 50 Shades of Grey, but things that are more, I don't want to say darker, but more deep in terms of what they're exploring, that they're not just exploring the happy side of romance, but often the dark side.
Well, yeah, that's true. I mean, one of my novels, The Missing Wife, is actually about coercive control. And it's about a woman who runs away. Obviously, it was called The Missing Wife, but she runs away from her husband, and he comes running after her. And, and in writing that, I was exploring how she got to this situation, how somebody who is an intelligent woman and a clever woman, a smart woman, suddenly gets into a position where she is being effectively controlled by somebody else. And then how you manage to break out of that and what happens as a consequence to that. So, yeah, I mean, you say romance, and there is romance in all of my books, but it's not necessarily the most important part of what the book is.
So that doesn't really fit you in with chick lit. Where would you be on the shelves of the library or the bookstore? It's kind of hard when you've got cross-genre stuff, right? I think
they don't in the bookstores now. They don't really use chick lit so much. I think it's really just contemporary fiction or contemporary women's fiction or something like that is where they would go for. I mean, I think the original chick lit thing was around the Bridget Jones time.
Bridget Jones, yeah.
Comedic novel.
Yeah.
And then just kind of expanded to be anything that was written by a woman that wasn't crime or literary, so.
Yeah. Well, publishers jump on a bandwagon when something's popular. And people in America don't see this, but on Amazon UK, when you see a book, you see the title of the book, and then for fans of, or the page-turning thriller of the summer, and this sort of thing. So they've put these qualifiers after the title of the book on Amazon, which kind of tries to force these books into a smaller genre.
It does, but that's very Amazon-ish. I think it's like they try to, if you read this, you like this, I presume it's something that their algorithms do or something like that. I know that my old books have been recommended to me on Amazon, which I kind of laugh at. But it's so difficult. It's so difficult. And I hate using genre to define books of any type. But, you're right. In order to sell books, publishers do need to be able to kind of put them into some kind of overarching category, I guess.
How many books did you write when you finally gave up your banking job?
I had written 4 books when I gave up my banking job. I mean, the first 3 books that I'd written were published in Ireland. And even though, they did hugely well in Ireland, the population is so small that you would never be able to give up your work, a day job, and I had a mortgage and things like that. So, but then after that, I got an offer from a publisher to write full time, and I said, this is it. This is what I've always wanted to do.
Was it easy to take that leap, or was there a lot of reflection? What's the risk? Will it work out? What happens if I fail?
I wasn't worried about what would happen if I failed, because I said to myself, if I don't do this, I will always regret it. And I think you always regret the things you didn't do more than the things that you did do, So I wasn't, I kind of felt, well, if it doesn't work out, I will have given it a shot, and, that's fine. And I'm sure I'll get a job doing something, So I was in confidence that I would still be able to, at worst, I could stack shelves, I was kind of thinking like that. But I was really lucky, and it did work out. So in the end, I think the only regret that I had was that I had a whole wardrobe of really snazzy business suits that I never wore, expensive business suits that I never wore again.
Well, when I left the corporate world, I was glad to get rid of the suits and ties. That wasn't much fun. So let's talk about how you use Scrivener. You have been a Scrivener user for how long?
Well, I just checked it before we started to talk, and I got Scrivener first in 2010. So I have written 12 and a half books using Scrivener.
So what is your process? You told me before we started that you made a list of what you use in Scrivener.
I did, just to kind of make sure that I kept on track with what I was saying. But the main reason that I discovered Scrivener first, or went looking for a program like Scrivener, was that we had to, my publishers, everybody used Word, and Word is hopeless for long documents. And every so often Word would crash, and if you tried to do a long document, or you tried to merge documents and everything, and I just found it really stressful. And I was looking to try and find something that would work for me. And I saw the Scrivener app, and I downloaded it, and I said, okay, well, I'll give this a try and see how it works. And what I instantly liked about it was the fact that that the binder process meant that you could just load in folders. And for me, each folder is a separate chapter. And so that was ideal, because that's how I like to divide up my work in chapters and pieces that I was going to write. And then in each folder, then I could subdivide down into scenes. So the way that I work is I have my folders, and then inside those I have 3 or 4 different scenes that work in each chapter. And so then I can pop back then when I'm looking at things, because I do move things around quite a bit. As you get further into the novel, you kind of say to yourself, okay, maybe I should, this piece should come sooner, or I should be able to move this around. And so I can pop it up on the corkboard. I look and see what the main elements of each folder are, and I think, oh yeah, I can move this here, and I can move that there. So I find that for me is the number one feature in Scrivener. And then when you've got it all together, you can compile it. It pops out as one document. It never crashes. It's perfect for me. And the only niggle that I have is that when it does a document, it does it as a Microsoft document instead of a Pages document, because I'd rather it did Pages, and then I could just export it to Microsoft. But it's such an easy, intuitive structure, and that it worked brilliantly for me from the very start. I like as well. I was kind of thinking, I like the fact that you can do a dual screen. Sometimes, because
you can split the screen, yeah.
Split the screen, and if you want to just look at two things side by side, 2 pieces side by side, where you're trying to maybe move things around again, or where you're trying to compare what you've written to something else, you're able to do that. So I find that useful. I don't use that a lot, but when I do use it, it's really useful. I like little things like the word frequency, because I always find when you're writing a novel, and it's different for every novel, but there's one word that you just use all the time. And it can be a random word, I was reading somebody else's book recently, and they were using the word boasted a lot, and they were using it in the way an estate agent does it, or they're saying, the house boasted the big garden. And once it gets into your head, you just can't get it out. You've seen it all the time. And so I find that really useful.
There's a Stephen King novel, 11/22/63. Now, I remember this word because I have a good vocabulary, but I had to look it up. He uses the word obdurate several times in the book. Now, the first time you hear it, it's like a stain. But then when you hear it every 100 pages, and this is a long book, it's like warts. And something that uncommon just stands out, doesn't it?
Well, that's the thing. And quite often it is. I mean, it wouldn't necessarily be as uncommon as obdurate, but it would be, it would be a word that wouldn't be used a lot. And yeah, it does stand out. And so I find that really, really helpful. I also find, even though I don't set myself word targets, a word count, when I sit down to write, I do find it useful to set a project target and say to myself, I want to be finished by a certain date. And so I can pop back and see how I'm doing. I find that useful. And I also find, I have a folder that I would use as a research folder, and I find it really useful that you can drag in web pages and things like that and keep them all in one place. So you don't have to go off and keep searching for things again. So there are quite a lot of elements that for me work very well in Scrivener, but the main one is being able to break down the novel into its kind of component parts and move them around.
Do you outline your books?
No, I wish I did.
Oh.
I wish I did.
It's funny because I've talked to people, they outline in detail and maybe they'll make changes, and others like, absolutely not. We had Peter Robinson on the podcast, the first episode, and he says, I just start with a body and I figure it out from there. Now, he's got a recurring character, which is often the case with mysteries, but he said that he wants to discover what happens himself.
Actually, he's absolutely right, because, I think if you know everything that's going to happen in your novel, it's not so exciting to write it. But if you're writing the novel and the characters develop in front of your eyes and change in front of your eyes and do things somewhat unexpectedly, which always happens, that is so joyful, and it just makes a really good journey for you as a writer. And you kind of more enthused by that. And if I felt if I was writing to a plan, that would restrict me, and I find it very difficult to do that. Having said that, there are times when I think to myself, just a little bit of outlining might be useful. I usually, when I start, I kind of write about three sentences about this book is about, so that I kind of know what I'm trying to go with it. It's about X happening, and that's as far as I get with it. And then sometimes I come back and I look back and think, oh yeah, sort of about that.
I found an interview with you in The Independent, and the journalist starts the article by saying, one of the first women writers to set her stories in contemporary Ireland. There must be other women writers who set their stories in contemporary Ireland.
Well, there are now, and there are a lot of writers, women writers, who set their stories in contemporary Ireland now. But my first novel was actually published back in the late 1990s. And at that point, there weren't. And it was one of the reasons that I write in the genre I write, because there weren't, when I was in my 30s, and there were no novels about women who had a career or who were juggling a career and family or who were commuting to work or anything. An awful lot of Irish writing was still set back maybe 20 years previously. So, but since then, I mean, we have had a lot of women writers doing really well. And that's fantastic. And I think it's one of those things where, again, as Ireland is changing, women were changing, we kind of found our voices and we were happy to write about our current lives. So that has changed now. Yeah.
I like to ask my guests to recommend a book for our listeners, either something you're reading right now or one of your favorite books. What can you recommend?
Well, I have just read a book which will be out in May this year, and it's called The Tumbling Girl. And it's by a new writer. She's in the UK. Her name is Bridget Walsh, so it is quite an Irish-sounding name. But the novel itself is set in Victorian England, and it's a kind of I wouldn't say gothic mystery because it's not that, but it's a mystery novel, and I think it's going to be a part of a series, and there's recurring characters, but it is beautifully written. It's set around a music hall and a murder in a music hall, and one of the characters is somebody who works in the music hall, and then there's a kind of slightly aristocratic detective. but it's a kind of a nice twist on that particular genre of both the crime genre but the historical detail is really good too. So I enjoy that very much, and I think I would really recommend that. You know, it's an easy book to read, but it's got a lot going on.
Okay, Sheila O'Flanagan, thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you.
If you like the podcast, please follow it in iTunes or your favorite podcast app. To learn more about Scrivener, go to scrivenerapp.com. Join us next month for another conversation on Right Now with Scrivener.